Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for watching this. We are doing a Q&A with author Lindsay Lackey. She is the author of our 2020 All Pikes Peak Read selection, All the Impossible Things. And we're just really excited to have her here today. Lindsay's actually a Colorado Springs native. She attended and graduated from Lewis Palmer High School. And we're just going to jump in and ask her some awesome questions about her book. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's fun to be here.
Yeah. Well, great. So I was just so blown away by their parenting skills. And I think, Britt, you've talked about this too, but they were just like such great parents. Is that something you researched? Is that just like your something your parents modeled for you? Like, how did you really give them these awesome skills, I guess?
Well, thank you. That's an enormous compliment because I am not a parent myself. So a lot of the parenting skills, I guess, that Celine and Jackson had, honestly, were just things that my parents naturally did. I have really great parents, and I just grew up in a very stable environment that felt like I had a lot of independence and a lot of creative freedom, but I also knew the boundaries and I knew the rules that I had to follow. So I think probably a lot of Celine and Jackson comes from both my aunt and uncle who inspired those characters in real life. And then also just the more nitty-gritty parenting, I think, was just my instinct for parenting based on my own parents and, maybe what I would do if I had kids, but I don't yet. So that could be totally wrong. I may have kids and be totally different. So we'll see. I may aspire to be my own character someday. Got to be more like Celine.
Okay, Lindsay, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So if you could make one impossible thing possible, what would it be?
Oh, one impossible thing. That is such a good question. I think I would love it if it was not so impossible for people who have different opinions to communicate with each other. I feel like we have really lost that in our society, and we're in the midst of a major election, and it's been a really rough year, and so there's just a lot going on, but I think it has become more and more clear in the last few years that we don't have the ability to dialogue with each other if we have extreme differences of opinion. We tend to do this thing where we think, well, my opinion is obviously right. I have the moral high ground or whatever it is. You are wrong, therefore you're a monster. That's something that seems to happen in our society. No matter what side of an issue you're on, you think that the person in opposition to you is a monster. And so I wish that the impossible thing that I could bring about would be the ability to actually just communicate and dialogue. Not necessarily agree. We don't need to agree. I think it's healthy to have disagreements and different opinions in a society, but I would love it if we could just talk to each other without being just so hateful and walled off to really listening to one another. So that's my impossible thing for this election season at the end of 2020. That's what I would like.
It does feel impossible. You're right. It's a very nice one, though. I like it.
Thank you. Boy, does that seem impossible. Let's really work on that, everybody. Come on, society.
Yeah, I'm like, it is possible, but it doesn't seem like it is.
My question is not as deep as Britt's.
That's okay. I need a balance.
One of the things I really liked when I read the book is I thought of them as little Easter eggs in my head of the names of the animals.
Oh, yeah.
Like all the literary references. I think my favorite was that the turtle who lives a really long time is named Tuck, or Tuck Everlasting, I'm assuming.
Yep.
What was your favorite little Easter egg or reference?
Well, pretty much all of the names in the book have some reference to me, and some of them are just an Easter egg to me personally and don't really mean anything. But all of the animals, of course, were literary references in some way. Every single one of them, even Alfonso, the horse. And so that was really fun for me. Tuck Everlasting, I'm particularly proud of because it just seems like such a perfect name for a tortoise that, first of all, lives a really long time and can tuck his head into his shell. I mean, there's just so many layers there. So And the Tucks, of course, in the book, Tuck Everlasting had to be secret. They had to hide from society, and that's a big theme with both Red and Tuck, that ability to hide. So yeah, that I'm really proud of that one, probably. The names themselves, I'll give you a little information about Red, and the fact that her birth name is Ruby. And this is something that people ask me about a lot. But why is her nickname Red when she doesn't have red hair? It states that very clearly. And her birth name is Ruby. That just seems so strange. And there is a reason for it. And it does say it in the book, but it's like a quick one sentence thing that most people don't notice. And she was born Ruby. I think names are really important, so being named and what people call us really has an impact on us, whether it's a nickname. I mean, think about it. If you've ever been given a nickname that you were uncomfortable with, if you wear glasses, someone called you Four Eyes or something, that those nicknames really stick with us. They mean something to us, for good or for bad. And so Red, who was born Ruby, her mom called her Red, and her mom says to her at one point in their very first interaction in the book, when her mom calls her Ruby, and she says, everybody calls me Red, and Mom says, why? She said, well, because you call me Red. And then Wanda's reaction is, oh, that's right, you're not fancy enough to be a Ruby. And it's just this one quick line in the book, but that line came to me, and I built the scene around that line because I felt like it revealed so much about the character of Wanda and about the core of Wanda's character and of her relationship with Red. And the fact that Red takes on that nickname and doesn't question it. She assumes her mother is right about her and holds that nickname close. She wants to be called Red throughout her life until, of course, the very end of the book, when she makes a different decision. So that was such an important thing to me. And I've had people say, I don't get it. Why didn't they just call her Ruby? Or why don't she have another nickname? It's because I wanted to symbolize her mom is just taking away a little bit of her precious identity. Because Red and Ruby, as words, are very similar. But Ruby is fancier. It's a precious stone. So yeah, that name too also, I think, meant a lot to me. But the funny thing is, the actual name Red Bird is her name. Was just sort of an inside joke with a friend of mine who was like, name your character Red Bird. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't going to stick at first. And then the more I fell in love with her, I was like, no, this is actually her name. And I knew that background was coming to her. So the name came as a joke, but then developed a lot of meaning.
That's awesome. Are there any Easter eggs with the animal names that people don't get? Is there one that you're like, I wish people would ask me about this one, or no one seems to catch this one?
Not really. There's nothing too deep about any of the others, I don't think. I mean, the goats are Billy Goat Gruff, and the llamas are Lancelot and Merlin. Merlin was actually added in because my agent, when she read it, she was like, I grew up with llamas and they usually come in pairs. They like to be together. I said, oh, okay, so I'll add another llama. No problem there. Gandalf being, a female dog who's black and not gray or white was just sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing for me. There is actually a Newfie on Instagram called Gandalf the Grey, and he's a giant gray Newfoundland, and his name is appropriate. He's a boy, and he's gray, so it kind of works. But I really liked the idea of Celine just loving this name, but then also not going with the gender norms for names. I don't know. I liked that about Celine.
Yeah.
So what's your like favorite question to answer on these like kind of book discussion tour things? Do you have one? And if so, answer it.
Oh, way to put the ball in my court.
It's like, what do you want to talk about is basically what I'm asking you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I think, a lot of people ask me what the inspiration behind the story was, and I've talked about this a lot, but I always love to talk about it because it was inspired by my family, my real family. In around the year 2010, I think, my aunt and uncle, who were middle-aged at the time, they had grown children and they even had a grandchild. They decided to become foster parents. And, most empty nesters want to go explore the world or just enjoy their grandchildren or something. And my aunt and uncle became foster parents and opened their home to kids who really needed a safe place to live. And I just loved that. That was such a beautiful story to me. So that was sort of how the seed was planted. And then my aunt told me that one day she was at an event with a little boy that she was fostering at the time, and she saw this little girl. And she said she instantly had the knowledge that that little girl was going to be her daughter one day. She just looked at her and knew. And sure enough, through a series of events, she ended up fostering that little girl and then adopting her. And so that too was just such a beautiful thing. The idea that you can, and I've heard other people tell me this, that they've experienced this, that you can see a child and just love them unconditionally and deeply in an instant and want to provide them a home. I talked to many people who've fostered and adopted children who had that exact same experience, and I loved that. So I really wanted to capture that beautiful little story and put it into a book. And I really wanted to honor the foster care system and the amazing, amazing work that people do. I feel like the foster care system gets such a bad rap. Whenever there's a TV show with some criminal and they're like, oh, well, he was in the foster care system for 16 years. Or, if somebody's arrested in real life, they always mention, oh, well, he was in foster care or she was in foster care or whatever it is. And that's just such a negative image that, we only hear in general media, we only hear the bad stories about foster care. And that is just not the case. It is overwhelmingly full of people that love these kids, that sacrifice so much, and the kids themselves are incredible humans. They're so resilient and funny and caring and loving, and they're like Red. They want a place where they fit in and they want to be safe, just like we all do. So I really kind of wanted to destigmatize foster care a little bit, and there are plenty of books out there that deal with the bad situations in foster care, which exist. I'm not denying that exists. There are absolutely terrible situations in foster care. And of course, foster care originates in trauma. So no child comes into foster care because their life has been great. It all originates from trauma. So these kids are carrying a lot with them. But I wanted to showcase the people like Ms. Anders, the caseworker, who works so tirelessly and is there for Red in the middle of the night. She's like barely dressed because she just ran out the door. Her shoes don't match and her buttons are all askew. And I wanted to showcase that there are people like that, more people than we know, who are working so hard to protect these kids and to love these kids well. So that was a really big goal of mine in this story.
As you know, we reached out to, DHS and they thought it was an amazing depiction. So I feel like that's a huge compliment, right? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. I hear from a lot of readers who were foster parents or who were foster kids or who've worked in foster care in some way who have said the same thing. And that really means so much to me, that I feel that people feel I've captured the story accurately for their own experiences. Of course, there are people who don't feel that way, and that's fine because we're all different. We all have different experiences. But I'm really glad that so many feel like it is an accurate portrayal of what the system is like.
It gave me goosebumps. So I have kind of two questions that go hand in hand. I think one thing I really enjoyed about the book was I felt like there was this really sense of each character had this deeper backstory that you kind of touch on but didn't really go into. I think about Marvin and his parents and grandparents, and then Celine's backstory a little bit. Yeah, I love Marvin too. He's just so cute.
Marvin's the best. I love Marvin. So cute. Yeah.
And I always really love that as a reader. I mean, a lot of the books that I've really fallen in love with have these really big worlds around them. And so I think that was one of the things I liked about it, is I could sense there's all this other backstory for all these characters that you've kind of just sprinkled in details for. So when you were looking at those backstories, was it hard? Did you have to cut stuff that you were really sad about? Was it hard to know how far into a backstory to go to? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could see that being my instinct is always to give way too much information, but I think there's that fine line.
Yeah. I use a program when I'm writing called Scrivener, and there's a folder in Scrivener where you can keep everything that you're deleting so that you're not actually deleting it. So instead of calling it trash, although I do call it trash sometimes if I'm bitter, but when I'm writing, I label this folder Box in the Garage, and it's just where I'm going to put everything that I'm taking out of the story as I'm revising. And All the Impossible Things, just to give you a little idea, I'll show you how big it is. It's right here. It's about that big. It's not huge. It's 68,000 words, roughly. The folder in which I threw away many scenes and drafts of things was 273,000 words. It's over 1,100 pages of story that I wrote that did not end up in the book. Now, some of that is almost full drafts that I just pitched and started over for whatever reason. And most of it though, is scenes and things that I drastically rewrote or totally had to take out or whatever. It's a lot of backstory. So I'm glad that you feel that the backstory was really evident in this book, because it was very clear to me in my head. I could talk to you for hours about all of these characters and where they come from and what they were doing. So
the story I thought a lot to myself is I'm like, are we going to find out how Celine and Jackson got together? Because I feel like that's a whole story.
It's a whole story.
But I was like, and I feel like it's there somewhere. It might not be in this book, but it exists.
It exists. It does exist. And who knows? I won't tell it to you now, because maybe someday I'll be able to write it down again. I don't know. We'll see. I have no official plans, but I'm going to hold on to that one.
Well, that's cool. That's crazy though. 200,000 words.
Ooh. Yeah, that's like 2 of the Game of Thrones books. You know, those things are like 1,000, 500 pages or more. It's like two or 3 Game of Thrones books. It's a lot.
I mean, I'm sure there's no like normal in the writing process, but is that something that a lot of authors have? You know, for every 60,000 words you publish, you've got 2,000 words of not publishable content, or do you know?
I don't know if that's normal or not. I think I have a pretty terrible writing process that I'm really trying to adapt and hone and become better at my craft, because I tend to write an almost full draft of a book, you know, like 30 to 50,000 words of a book, and then I just get frustrated with it and throw it all away and start over from scratch and don't even look back at it. And in some ways that's good, because the stuff that needs to be in the story really sticks in my head and everything else goes away, and I learn a lot with every draft. But that is a super exhausting way to write a book. And so the book that I'm working on now, I'm really trying not to do that. I really approached this one with a lot more intentionality than I did with All the Impossible Things or any project before it. So hopefully I'm learning how to not write 200,000 words of a story and just throw them away. Maybe I can write a little bit less and just have stuff in my head instead of throwing things away. We'll see. I don't know if it's going to work. I wish I knew how many I know other authors. Yesterday I was doing a panel with authors about revision, and one author took her 17 years to write her book, and so she thinks she did somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 revisions. So surely she has somewhere around the same amount of words, if not way more, thrown away than I do. But I don't know that everyone tracks that the same way, so it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah. And if George R.R. Martin has a similar amount thrown away, can you imagine how many words he's thrown away in his lifetime?
Can you imagine how mad his fans would be if they found out that many words existed that they haven't, and we've been waiting how many years for the next book in the series? People would be like trying to hack his computer and try to get to it.
Well, doesn't he use a typewriter though? I feel like I read that somewhere. So they can't even hack him.
Probably.
But then there's no extra words, actually. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about this last night, but I'd love for you to talk about it again, which was the decision to put the magical realism aspect into the book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the magic in the book was almost an accident, and then also very intentional at the same time. The very first scene that I wrote for this story was the opening scene where Red is getting kicked out of a foster home. And the very, very first draft I wrote of it, she was not magic, but there was a storm outside. And I didn't write anything else for the story, but then I went back and revised that first draft, or that first chapter. And as I was revising it, I wrote a line. I didn't plan on it, but I wrote a line about how the magazine in the room the pages started flapping and fluttering. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, she has the wind. The wind is coming from Red. This storm is being generated by Red, not necessarily just outside. And that idea, like the instant, it sort of accidentally fell into my lap, that idea. But then the instant it was there, I knew that it was the right choice. I knew that creating stormy weather, but not having control over it. She's not an X-Men, but just having this thing that reacts to her emotions was such a perfect metaphor for Red. And I knew that she was going to be a pretty withdrawn character and pretty closed off to the people around her. So this was the perfect way to demonstrate that there's a lot going on inside this little girl's heart without her having to say the words or have to think the words even. I could just show it through the wind. So it ended up being the perfect metaphor and exactly the right magic for Red. In early drafts of the story, part of those 300,000 words almost that are thrown away, there was a lot more fantasy element to the magic. There was just magic everywhere, and there weren't a lot of clear, defined rules around it. And that was one of the bits of feedback I got from my critique partners. And then when I initially sent it out to agents, I also got the same feedback of the rules of the magic isn't really clear. Can you rewrite it? And then we'd like to see it again. And so I had to go back in and I had to just keep taking away layer after layer after layer of the magic. In early drafts, just to give you an idea how much things change, Red had 3 imaginary friends that may or may not have been imaginary. They may have been actual players in the world that only she could see. And that was Meg Murray from A Wrinkle in Time, Anne of Green Gables, and Matilda from Roald Dahl's Matilda. So she had these 3 imaginary friends from books that were sort of informing her and verbalizing some of the things she couldn't verbalize. And there was a talking rat, and there was crazy magic in early drafts. It was not great. And so I really had to peel a lot of that away to find the truest heart of the magic. And I wanted this to be a realistic story. So when I was getting feedback that people were confused if Red was maybe mentally ill, I knew that I wasn't doing the magic right. So the more I peeled back, the more the magic purely became this sort of magical realism element. But it's not technically magical realism, but it's realistic fiction with a little touch of magic is what I like to call it. Because I wanted it to be there. And there is some question for people as to whether or not the magic truly exists in the world or if it is just in Red's head. And that's okay with me if that question is still there a little bit, and it's not nearly as bad as as it was a few drafts before when it was crazy magic. So yeah, I just loved the metaphor of the magic for Red in particular.
For the record, I would totally read that crazy magic.
Thank you, but you'd read it and be like, what?
Yes, happening? Exactly. That sounds great.
All right, I had one reader. That's good. Unlike Becca, as we have learned, she needs resolution.
Whatever. One of her favorite books is Long Way Down, which is like the most unresolved book of all.
Yeah.
Anyway, spoiler alert.
Yes. The graphic novel just came out. Maybe you should read that one. Maybe it will give you more of a sense of closure.
Maybe. Oh. Maybe not. Have you read it? But you said it in a way that like maybe you knew some things about it. Okay.
No, I haven't read it yet. I mean, I've read Long Way Down, but I haven't read the graphic novel. Yeah.
I do need to shore up my Goodreads challenge with some graphic novels because I'm just so far behind at this point. I don't think I'll ever catch up this year.
Yeah.
Speaking of Goodreads challenges, because I know you read a lot, Lindsay, what are you enjoying right now? Like, what have you read recently that you liked?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I'm in the midst of writing my next novel, and so I am reading a lot of astronaut biographies. I've always enjoyed biographies, but I usually read, one a year of different people. This year so far, I think I've read 7 astronaut biographies. So I'm reading a lot of that, a lot of science-y, going to space type things, which is fun. I just read The Invisible Boy by Alyssa Hollingsworth, and it just came out last month, I think. I think it came out in September. And it's beautiful. It's about a girl who wants to be Lois Lane, and she's a reporter. She's 11, I think, maybe 12. And she wants to be Lois Lane. She wants to be a reporter, and she's convinced that this boy in her neighborhood has a superpower. She's convinced that he's a superhero and he can make himself invisible. And then as she's trying to get to know him, the more she learns about his life, she uncovers the fact that it's not a good thing that's going on in his life. And so she has to kind of try and help him. So it's such a beautiful book. It's really, really great. Highly recommend that. And gosh, what have I've read a lot of astronaut biographies. Did I mention that? Oh, I just read Fable by Adrienne Young, who wrote Sky and the Deep and The Girl the Sea Gave Back. Oh, it was so good. I had to message her on Instagram. I barely know her, but I had to message her and be like, please tell me what happens. I need the next book. She just wrote back, ha ha ha. So, that one's really good. It's kind of swashbuckling, and it's about a girl who's...
Is it Vikings?
No, it's not. This one's not Vikings. Her other two are kind of Viking-ish, but this one is about a girl who's a free diver, and she's kind of abandoned on an island by her dad, who owns this shipping, trading. It's its own world, but this he's a merchant shipman, and he's kind of notorious, and she's trying to get back to him and off of this island. And anyway, it's great. It's really beautiful and lush, and yeah, it's kind of romantic. So it's a good YA one. I really enjoyed that one.
I feel like this is a question whenever we have an author that a teen will inevitably ask. I'm guessing it's probably one you get asked a lot, but what advice would you give to someone who thinks maybe one day they want to be an author and write books?
I do get that question a lot, and I'm so glad that I do, because I love being able to give the advice. There are a few things about being an author that you can start doing right now, and one of those things is reading. Just read a lot, and don't just read the things you know you're going to like. Read things that are really different, things that might challenge you a little bit. Reading things like poetry is really good for you to learn how to economize your language and to learn how to paint images with just a few words. And I can tell you, really cool authors like Jason Reynolds have a background in poetry. It's really the backbone of a lot of authors. So read poetry, read screenplays and plays and all of that. Just read as widely as possible. You'll learn so much by doing that. And of course, writing. If you want to be a writer, you actually have to write. And it's just like if you want to be a basketball player, you have to. Actually, I don't know what basketball players have to do, because I don't play basketball. I don't play sports at all. But you have to practice. You have to practice shooting hoops or whatever it is, or running, or, writing is a muscle that you have to develop over time. It's not something you're going to be good at on the first try. So absolutely practice by writing and telling stories and letting other people read them and listening to their feedback. You don't have to do everything they say, but learn to listen to what others have to say about your work, and learn how to sort out what's helpful and what's not. And don't be too precious about your stories, because if you want to be a writer, there are going to be people who don't love your book after you've slaved on it for 3 or 4 years and really tried to perfect it. There are going to be people who hate it, and so you have to understand that you need a thick skin a little bit to be a writer, but you also just need to be confident and know that you are doing your craft and your art to the best of your ability. So start practicing now, because you're going to need every muscle you develop as a writer. You're going to need it for the rest of your life.
Speaking of developing writing skills, one thing that I'm always super interested in the publishing process, just because who doesn't love that BTS content? I don't know. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what it was like getting published. And I know you came into it with kind of a diverse background compared to most writers. So
yeah, I was very lucky. I feel like my whole life I either wanted to be a singer or a writer growing up. And I actually went to college to study music, and then had a physical situation with my jaw that I just had a lot of jaw pain and I couldn't sing. I physically could not sing. So I had to switch majors to being a writing major. And so that was fine with me because I've always loved writing and singing equally. So once I graduated college, I was just trying to stay as close to the publishing industry as I could. I wanted to learn anything I could about what it meant to be a published author and how you get there. And I didn't know anything, so I started by working in a bookstore. And I worked in a bookstore for about 3 weeks after I graduated college. And then I actually got hired at Pikes Peak Library District. And I worked in the library for about 5 years, and I just learned so much about books and readers. One of my favorite things about working in the library was readers advisory. And when someone would come up to me and say, I really liked this one book, but I don't know what else to read. Oh, okay, let's talk. I loved that. That was my favorite. So I learned so much about what readers want, how to talk about books in a way that makes people excited. That's an incredibly valuable skill as a writer because you have to pitch your own books to people all the time. So it's really good to know how to talk about books in a way that people respond to. And then after I worked at the library, I actually got a job with Penguin Random House, and I worked in marketing and publicity for a little while, and that's one of the big publishers. So I had all sort of the wide spectrum of a background before I even tried to get published, and I understood publishing better than most debut authors do when they are first entering that world. But getting published is a long road. But while I was doing all of that day job stuff, I was also writing. Before I wrote All the Impossible Things, I wrote 5 or 6 manuscripts that are not even in a drawer, they're in the trash. Like I'll never even look at them again because they were bad. But I was practicing writing novels for years. And then I finally decided to write All the Impossible Things. And I had had the idea for over 10 years. At this point I've had it for over 10 years, but I had had the idea for about 5 years when I started writing All the Impossible Things. I just hadn't let myself write it yet. And it took me about 2 years to write it, to get it to the point where I was submitting it to agents. And in writing, in publishing these days, you just really need an agent. And they are somebody who goes to the publisher for you. And they know who to go to. They have the contacts. They can negotiate deals. You just really need an agent. And so I started my agent search in late 2017. And I sent it out to a bunch of agents, and I got feedback from them. I had a really good response to it. A lot of people were really interested in it. But then when they read the full manuscript, they would write back and say, it's not quite there yet. You need to make some more changes. And so I did. I didn't get discouraged. I took their advice and listened to what they were saying and figured out I needed to peel away some of the magic and make it a little clearer. And I revised a whole new draft. And I did that one really fast. I think I did that within just a couple of months. And then right before, it was about a week before Thanksgiving, I sent it out again. And I actually, for the first time, I sent it to my dream agent at that point. And I hadn't queried her before because she represents some of the most amazing people in the world, some of the most incredible writers. And I thought, there is no way this woman is going to want to have anything to do with me. And then my friends, my writing friends, get yourself some friends like this, said to me, Lindsay, your book is about impossible things happening, and you feel like it's impossible for this agent to want your book. So you're a hypocrite if you don't send it to her. And I was like, you're right. And so I did. I sent it to her about a week before Thanksgiving, and she responded right away and asked to read the whole thing, which was amazing. So I sent it to her, and then I spent all of Thanksgiving going, oh my gosh, I was so nervous. And she called me the week after, like just 4 or 5 days after Thanksgiving, and wanted to talk about representing me and wanted to make some more suggestions for changing the manuscript. And then once I was talking to her, it was amazing how fast everything came together. I could not believe that she was interested in me. She did end up signing me. She's the most wonderful agent in the world. And she sent my book out to publishers in early 2018 after I had done another revision for her. And it sold very quickly, which is kind of unusual. I feel like my story, once I signed with my agent, everything happened so fast, and that's not the case for so many writers. I was just very fortunate in the timing. So I recognize that a lot of it is just luck and timing. You have to put the work into it, and you do have to work hard and have to have the skill. But so much of this is just the opportunity and the timing and the luck. So I got really lucky. So it sold really fast. It sold in early 2018. And then it came out last September in 2019. So yeah. So it's kind of a crazy story, and now I'm just working on book 2 and praying that my agent likes it. Because I'm always afraid she's going to be like, I represent all these amazing people. I don't need you anymore. But she's not like that at all. That's just my own imposter syndrome talking.
You wrote that yesterday.
You said imposter syndrome and we were both like, what?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is real and it is hard. I mean, it can be really immobilizing. So I've struggled with it.
This is another question I'm going to ask just simply because I know it's one that a team would definitely ask if they were here. Are you going to write a sequel?
I'll never say never to writing a sequel. I don't have any official plans to writing a sequel yet, but I mean, we've already talked about how much backstory there is to this that I love, and I love the characters. So if there's a way for me to go back into this story that makes sense and doesn't feel like I'm just sort of beating a dead horse, as they say, which is a horrible phrase, but maybe I would come back to it someday, but there are no official plans yet. I do know that Red's story, as I needed to tell it, is complete. So I'm pretty confident I won't be telling any more of Red's story. She's just off living her life now. And I also won't be telling Marvin's story. I get that question a lot. And I love Marvin, and I worked really hard to research him and his family and his heritage and his cultural roots, but I don't feel it's my place to tell his story, with him as the protagonist. That it's just not my story to tell. So I won't be telling Marvin's story either. But there are lots of characters in this book. Who knows? Who knows what will happen?
We'll be on the lookout for that Celine and Jackson.
Yeah. I feel like romance novelists do this a lot, where it's like they have the one main couple and they like tell their story, but then there's like 5 other couples that you've been introduced to, so you get like 5 more books.
Like Jasmine Guillory, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So you could totally do that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
You'll still see Red, but she's not really the main part of the story.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, she's like an Easter egg unto herself, kind of.
There we go.
Iridescent style. No. They're all set in the same thing. Yeah. I was going to ask, so one of the reasons that we chose this book is because we really wanted something that focused on resilience, given the 2020 of it all. And I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts about kind of the importance of resilience in terms of writing, because I imagine there's a decent amount of rejection and
yeah. Oh gosh, I think resilience is, if having a writing career is a car, you have to have 4 wheels, and resilience is one of those wheels. It is something that you absolutely need to be a writer. Not to be a writer, I mean, anybody can be a writer. If you want to be a writer, you're a writer. But if you want to be published and you want to make a career out of publishing your stories and try to make a living off of this, then you need resilience big time. I think one of the biggest aspects of resilience for me, where it comes into play, is actually in the writing itself and in reminding myself every single day, yes, this is my job, but that's because I love it. I've made it my job. How lucky am I that I get to do this every day? So even on the days when it's hard, I'm going to write 500 words today. I did that last night. Yesterday was a super busy day for me. I was on the computer all day, not writing. I was doing all sorts of virtual events yesterday. And then at 11:30 last night, I thought, I haven't written it all today. I'm going to sit down and write 500 words. And so even those little moments of resilience, now I have 500 words more on my next novel than I did 24 hours ago. So you have to find ways to be resilient. And this is true in life, just in general. Sometimes it's just the moment. I'm going to make the decision to survive this moment. I'm going to make the decision to not respond to whoever's saying something that's irritating me, or I'm going to make the decision to get up and get out of bed and make myself breakfast or feed my kids or whatever it is. Like, you have to, sometimes the most resilient act is the smallest act, but those build up on each other. And so that theme of resilience, I think, kind of naturally appeared in the story because it was dealing with foster care, and kids in the foster care system are some of the most resilient humans on this planet. And truly, I think kids are some of the most resilient humans on this planet. And they're just so remarkable. But I also think the theme of resilience is just something that's probably going to appear in a lot of my work, because it's something I am trying to learn every day. I'm trying to grow resilience. I think resilience is a muscle too. I think hope is a muscle. Madeline L'Engle, one of my favorite authors, says belief takes practice. And she's talking about spiritual belief, but I think any form of belief takes practice. You know, believing in yourself takes practice. Believing in your relationship, in your marriage, in your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, takes practice. You know, all of this stuff, believing in your dreams, takes practice. And so it's a muscle to develop. Resilience is a muscle. So practice it with the small, especially in 2020. I love that you said the 2020-ness of it all. 2020 has kind of become a verb. It's like, it's so big. It's become a verb for all of us. But yes, this year in particular, some of the smallest things have been the most rewarding parts of this year. So practice those, enjoy those small moments of joy.
Your answer was very spot on for 2020, especially the hope thing, because it does feel very hopeless sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
In a way it hasn't, I feel like, before.
Yeah. And I think we're all feeling that too. And that's sometimes, honestly, that's the only thing that gives me hope in the day is the fact that we are all suffering so much, and we are all trapped in our homes, and we're all frustrated with the political situation and the health situation and everything. We are all feeling these feelings. And there's something about that makes me feel less isolated in this time of being very isolated. And, you know, I haven't seen my family since I was in Colorado in February, right before everything shut down. And I'm usually there 3-4 times a year to this point, you know, so it helps me not feel alone when I realize how much we are all suffering. I guess misery really does love company.
I think, Britt, do you have any other questions? I have one more that I thought would be a good one to maybe end on.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to let you, if you wanted to share, you've referenced it a few times, but just share a little bit, whatever you want to share about your upcoming project.
Oh yes, my upcoming project. I'm excited about my next book. I'm also exhausted by my next book. So a little backstory. I had actually turned in a totally different book to my editor at the beginning of 2020 that was going to be my second book. I turned it in February, and then the pandemic had been happening, but it really happened right after I turned it in. And that book, that manuscript, was really a lot about like illness and death. And when you write a book, you end up living with it very much. It's like right here in your face for a few years. You know, you're going through the editorial process, so you're really, really close to it for a long time. And then it comes out and you go through the promotional process, and that's another 6 months to a year of really hardcore engagement with your own work. And the idea of engaging that deeply with this story that was so much about death and illness for the next few years through a pandemic and everything was just too much for me. So I actually asked if I could write a different book. So my second book has been delayed a little bit because I asked to write something else. But now I'm writing a very fun book that has a lot to do with space camp and astronauts, if you couldn't tell by the 7 astronaut biographies that I've read. It's about a little boy who goes to a very elite and fake, but it's real in my world, space camp, where he's sort of being recruited at a very young age to be an astronaut. So it's sort of set in the future and the stuff that he has to deal with in that. So I'm excited about it. I get to write things like, I wrote a scene that takes place in a supersonic jet, and he gets to like experience 9Gs and 0Gs and throw up in the middle of doing a flip. And aerobatics, airplane flips. So stuff like that is really fun. It's just feels really different. It's very STEM oriented, this book. There's really no magic in it. It's very much a relational, realistic story, and yet there's this element of this really crazy space camp. So that's fun.
And since our audience is in the Springs, where is the guy from?
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
The kid lives in Woodland Park, Colorado. I did a school visit in Woodland Park earlier this year before everything happened. And the kids there were so great and they were so cute. And they were like, set your next book in Woodland Park. And so I decided to honor them with this manuscript because the one I was working on at the time wasn't set in Woodland Park. But so this one, he is from Woodland Park, Colorado. There's a very important scene that takes place at Fargo's Pizza. So there's a lot of Colorado Springs still happening in this book. Colorado will probably always play a part in the majority of my stories in the future. I just love Colorado. So
awesome. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us and letting us record it so we can show it to everyone who wasn't able to be here. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was really fun, and hopefully I'll get to see y'all in person sometime.